The evening of the 21st of January in 1968 was one filled with gunfire in the city of Seoul. The 31-man North Korean team tasked with assassinating the president of South Korea, Park Chung Hee, had come just 100 meters before the Blue House, the presidential residence of South Korea. The North Koreans had infiltrated the country days before leading up to the attack. However, their presence was discovered by 3 young brothers. The brothers later reported their discovery to the police, with the entire city being put on high alert. Realizing their plan was compromised, the North Koreans decided to press forward with the assassination anyway. They came within sight of the Blue House, but then the chief of police, noticing the men, began to question them. And as his suspicions grew, the North Koreans eventually opened fire. The ensuing firefight killed all but 2 of the North Koreans, one being captured and the other making his way back to North Korea. This failed assassination attempt of Park Chung Hee is known as the Blue House Raid. The Blue House Raid is a part of a series of conflicts between North and South Korea, sometimes referred to as the Second Korean War. The Second Korean War would see fighting break out all across the DMZ, with hundreds dying in the conflict. A series of tunnels of aggression from North Korea would also later be discovered, headed straight for the capital. Some of the tunnels even wide enough for entire battalions to fit through. Amidst rising tensions with North Korea, Park Chung-hee's 3rd re-election as president was just around the corner. Previously, his 2nd election had been won with relative ease. However, his 3rd re-election would be a bit of a different story. The Constitution had originally allowed for presidents to run 2 terms, but right before the 1971 election, his administration had passed a bill which extended the presidential limit to 3 terms, under the condition that this would be his last. However, over time, the National Assembly, the entity in which voted to approve or pass bills, became filled with more and more seats from the opposition party, the Democratic Party. It became to the point where the bill to let him run a 3rd term faced extreme opposition and was barely able to pass. To make matters worse, the 1971 election would be a close call. Park Chung-hee managed to win the election by a margin of 8%, barely defeating the increasingly popular Kim Dae-jung of the New Democratic Party, a longtime politician and a strong advocate for democracy. Park Chung-hee could sense that his grip was slipping, and despite winning his 3rd term, he would only have another 5 years left to reign, and he wasn't ready to give up power yet. But what was he to do? His administration had already done the impossible by bypassing the Constitution, allowing him to run for a 3rd term. But wait, the Constitution. That pesky Constitution. What if, instead of having to vote to change the Constitution, Park Chung-hee rewrote the Constitution in its entirety, the way he saw fit? Hey, wait, you can't do that! Immediately following the 1971 election, citing civil unrest as the reason, he dissolved the National Assembly and suspended the Constitution. Martial law was declared, universities were closed, and opposition party leaders were even arrested. Within a year, the Constitution would be replaced with the highly controversial Yusin Constitution. This new Constitution was specifically written so that Park Chung-hee's power could remain unchallenged and gave him far-reaching power over the government. Under the Yusin Constitution, the presidential term was increased to 6 years. Term limits were eliminated altogether. Only a single candidate could be on the ballot. The president had power over the Constitution and had the ability to suspend constitutional freedoms at will, and the president could dissolve the National Assembly at any time. The Yusin Constitution marks the beginning of the Fourth Republic of Korea and would see Park Chung Hee constitutionally declared as a dictator. Using the new constitution as a basis for the founding of a new republic, Park Chung Hee held another election the same year that the document was published, running completely unopposed. Realizing the madness of the document, many Koreans took to the streets to protest without success. The KCIA suppressed any political opponents and protesters, or anyone even suspected of going against Park Chung Hee's administration. Even Kim Dae-jung, the opposing Democratic candidate, wasn't safe from the watchful eyes of Park Chung Hee's regime. He narrowly survived a suspiciously targeted car accident which left a permanent injury to his hip. Fearing for his life, Kim Dae-jung would take refuge in Japan, during which Kim Dae-jung continued to meet with Democratic Party officials. However, just 2 years after his accident, a group of unidentified men kidnapped Kim Dae-jung as he was walking out of a meeting. 5 days later, Kim Dae-jung would be found in his home, back in Korea. In 2007, an internal investigation would in fact confirm that the KCIA was behind the kidnapping, with Park Chung Hee giving unwritten approval. Incidentally, Kim Dae-jung would eventually become the 8th president of South Korea. Throughout his administration, the KCIA grew to over 40,000 members, arresting, kidnapping, and torturing anyone involved in protesting. Thousands would be sent to camps to be re-educated, and many would die from the torture. Park Chung Hee had the country firmly in his grasp. However, even his authoritarian rule couldn't stop death itself. In 1974, Park Chung Hee was giving a speech at the National Theater of Korea, his wife in attendance next to him. During the middle of the speech, shots would be fired onto the stage, with the aim of killing Park Chung Hee. However, a stray bullet struck his wife instead, mortally wounding her. Park Chung Hee would stay on stage and finish his speech, despite his wife being carried off. She would be pronounced dead that same evening. Park Chung Hee would later write, "I felt as though I had lost everything in the world. All things became a burden. I lost my courage and will. A year has passed since then, and during that year, I have cried alone in secret too many times to count." 1978. Park Chung Hee is elected as the president once again, without opposition. This was the 5th time he had been the president of South Korea, ruling the country for 16 years, the past 7 of which as a dictatorship. But by now, the citizens of South Korea have started to grow discontent with his rule. Years of democratic suppression and strict ruling under his administration had taken its toll. By his 5th election, the country began to grow restless, as more and more people began calling to repeal the Yusin Constitution, an end to the dictatorship, and for the restoration of free elections. Despite knowing the risks involved with speaking out against the government, more and more people took to the streets in the name of democracy. These protests would hit its peak when a student-led demonstration in Busan grew to a crowd of over 50,000 people, spreading to the nearby city in Masan. However, Park Chung Hee would not relent and reacted decisively. Before the protests could spread further into the country, martial law was promptly declared and up to 1,000 people were arrested. By now, Park Chung Hee had become too powerful. But despite his attempts to control the country, this wouldn't be so. During this time, the director of the KCIA was named Kim Jae-kyu, arguably the 2nd most powerful person in the country next to Park Chung Hee. The exact reasons for his actions remain unclear. Some say it was because he was to be replaced as the director of the KCIA with someone else, and some say that it was in the name of democracy and nationalism. But whatever the reason, just 6 days after the Busan and Masan protests, in a dinner banquet, Kim Jae-kyu pulled a gun to Park Chung Hee and shot him. On the 26th of October, 1979, Park Chung Hee returned to the stars. Kim Jae-gyu was promptly arrested and later executed. However, Park Chung-hee's death merely brought in yet another authoritarian government, the Fifth Republic of Korea. True democracy wouldn't be achieved until 1987, 8 years after Park Chung-hee's death, when 5 million citizens took to the streets to protest in the name of South Korean democracy and freedom. The authoritarian government would finally relent at the feet of this monumental movement. Authoritarian ruling was ousted. Freedom of press and speech were restored. Free elections were held the same year. And with it, the Sixth Republic of Korea was established, the modern-day Korea that we know today. Park Chung-hee's legacy is one that is quite binary. A man whose unwavering belief that his nation was destined for greatness. This belief leading him to make decisions to accomplish his goal by any means necessary. This belief that ultimately led to countless heartache and his downfall. However, at the cost of authoritarian rule, his policies lifted South Korea from a third world nation into a modern one, managing to accomplish what other nations took decades to do. Poverty was reduced from 67% to an insane 11% by his death in 1979. His economic policies paving the way for multi-billion-dollar companies to spread Korean-made products across the world. 16 of the Fortune 500 companies coming from South Korea, with Korea accounting for 20% of global semiconductor manufacturing. Even 80% of all trees in Korea during the 1980s were said to be replanted during Park Chung-hee's administration. The letter K is now synonymous with the country of Korea. Sorry, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Kiribati, Kosovo, Kuwait, and Kyrgyzstan. Despite his oppressive and ruthless ruling, he is still viewed as one of the most popular presidents in Korea. A 2021 poll showing him to be one of the most highly rated presidents in South Korean history. Time magazine would also list him as one of the top 10 most influential Asian men of the century. Largely owed to his popularity, his daughter, Park Chung Hee, would eventually even go on to become the first female president of South Korea, even though that would end in complete disaster. Park Chung Hee was far from a perfect president, not by any means, and modern-day South Korea has a multitude of issues. But if all else, Park Chung Hee succeeded in one thing. Just as he wrote in his poems all those years ago, without a doubt, the legacy of Park Chung Hee is that he succeeded in projecting the name of his nation, Korea, to the world, albeit the southern half. So, the next time you're watching a mukbang K-drama, listening to K-pop, and watching something through a Samsung product, take a moment to reflect back on Park Chung Hee and the citizens of Korea on their insane battle to get to where they are today. And you just might think, holy shit, those Koreans are f***ing crazy.